雲の上気まぐれに与えた力の
that has at least 3 or 4 slices of bread. Think of the classic double-decker sandwich you get at a diner, cut into quarters and secured with a toothpick.
We've all seen them.
When you look at it through the lens of a professional cold kitchen, you aren't just making lunch, you are building a multi-story structure. You have to balance the moisture of the sliced tomatoes by placing them next to fat like mayonnaise or bacon, so their water doesn't seep into and compromise the structural integrity of the toasted bread.
Moisture management is key.
You have to layer the turkey and bacon so the height is perfectly uniform across the entire surface. And then you have to execute precise knife cuts to divide this towering, unstable structure into 4 identical, stable triangles.
And you must use a wooden toothpick as a literal load-bearing column, driven straight down through the center of gravity of each triangle.
It sounds funny to describe a sandwich that way.
It does, but if you have ever tried to eat or cut a poorly made club sandwich, you know it instantly collapses into a disastrous mess. The Garde-Manger chef must construct the sandwich with the final structural failure points in mind.
And the manual contrasts these massive structural clubhouse sandwiches with something entirely different at the absolute opposite end of the size spectrum, canapes.
The demanding microarchitecture of the cold kitchen.
The text defines them as bite-sized, decorative, open-faced sandwiches. It's basically a fancy French word for a small cracker or a tiny piece of toast topped with a spread and a highly specific garnish, usually served on trays at parties or banquets.
While a club sandwich is about robust stability and managing mass, a canapé is about intense, concentrated visual and flavor impact in a single, isolated bite. You are dealing with millimeters of space.
So there's no room for error.
None. You pipe a microgram of flavored mousse onto a crisp base, and you must top it with a single, perfectly placed herb leaf or a single caper. The precision and discipline required for a single chef to execute 500 identical canapés for a banquet without a single leaf out of place is staggering.
It really highlights the modular nature of the kitchen's output. You are producing hundreds of perfect, isolated components. And this modularity connects back to a term the manual defines earlier, which dictates how the guest actually experiences all this food in the dining room. The term is à la carte.
Yes, meaning by the card or from the menu.
The text explains that an à la carte menu lists items that are priced and ordered separately. Instead of paying one set price for a complete meal, you pay individually for the steak, you pay separately for the side of asparagus, and you pay for the drink.
Right, it gives the guest total control.
From the guest's perspective, it's about choice. But from the kitchen's perspective, what does an à la carte system actually require?
It requires extreme logistical synchronization. It means the different stations, the hot kitchen managing the grill, the cold kitchen managing the salads, have to be capable of producing their specific modular components completely independently, but timed so perfectly that they all arrive at the pass, ready for the dining room table, at the exact same second.
Wow.
The hot kitchen fires the steak, the Garde-Manger plates the delicate side salad, and they merge seamlessly. It is a highly stressful logistical ballet governed entirely by the timing of the ticket machine.
So we have conquered the biological safety protocols. We have survived the thermal dynamics of the stove. We have mapped the anatomy of the meat, and we have engineered the architecture of the cold kitchen. We are in the final stretch.
The final frontier.
But to get through this last door, we have to leave behind the flexible, intuitive world of the savory kitchen entirely.
We are entering the laboratory. We are entering the exact, uncompromising mathematics of baking and pastry.
This is a massive shift in mindset. In the savory kitchen, if a soup needs a little more salt, you just add it. If a sauce needs a splash of wine, you pour it in and reduce it. It is adaptable. You can taste and adjust.
You can fix your mistakes.
But the baking manual introduces a rigid, non-negotiable law right away. The great measuring deception. I want to push back on this because it frustrates home cooks everywhere. Why are professional bakers so absolutely obsessed with digital scales? Why isn't a cup of flour just a cup of flour? I have a set of measuring cups. They work fine for soup.
Because measuring by volume using cups is a physical illusion when it comes to compressible dry goods like flour or sugar. The manual delivers a massive realization here.
What's the realization?
It explains that in a professional bakery, ingredients are weighed rather than measured in volume, because weighing mass is fundamentally mathematically more accurate.
Okay, but how inaccurate can a cup really be? The example the source gives is staggering. It says a single cup of flour can weigh anywhere from 100 grams to 150 grams, depending entirely on how tightly it is packed into the cup.
Think about the physics of a bag of flour. Flour isn't a solid block. It is millions of tiny, dry particles with microscopic pockets of air trapped between them.
Okay.
If you gently spoon the flour into the measuring cup, you are mostly scooping trapped air. That cup might weigh 100 grams. But if you dip the cup directly into the bag and pack it against the side, you physically force all that air out and compress the particles tightly together.
So it looks the same.
Visually, it is still exactly one cup. It fills the exact same volume of space. But physically, there is 50% more actual flour matter in that cup.
So it might weigh 150 grams. And in the world of baking, being off by 50 grams of flour isn't just a minor flavor mistake, it is a structural catastrophe.
Absolutely. Baking is not cooking. It is a series of precise, interdependent chemical reactions. The flour provides the structure. The liquid provides the hydration. The leavener, like baking powder, provides the lifting gas.
So if I add 50% more flour,
If you accidentally introduce 50% more flour into that delicate chemical equation because you packed your measuring cup too tightly, there won't be enough liquid to hydrate it, and there won't be enough leavener to lift the added mass. Your cake won't just be a little dry, it will turn into a dense, unchewable brick.
that is why the text states so definitively, 100 grams on a digital scale is always exactly 100 grams. Gravity doesn't care how tightly you packed it. Mass is mass, and you must respect the mass if you want the chemistry to work.
Once you accept the absolute tyranny of the scale, you can start manipulating the physics of batters and doughs to achieve incredible results.
And the manual walks us through a beautiful progression of these physical manipulations. Let's start with the absolute simplest form. A batter that requires no chemical lift at all. The source brings up crepes.
The classic, delicate French crepe.
It describes them as a light, paper-thin batter used for savory or dessert dishes. And the defining secret of a crepe is the total absence of chemical leaveners. There's no baking powder, no baking soda, no yeast.
Which means it physically cannot rise. Think about an American pancake. A pancake relies on baking powder to create carbon dioxide gas bubbles that inflate the batter as it cooks on the griddle, making it thick and fluffy.
Right.
A crepe intentionally omits those gas-producing chemicals, resulting in a flat, dense, yet delicate sheet of cooked starch and egg that can be folded or rolled without breaking. It is chemistry by omission.
But when we move from thin liquid batters up to thicker doughs, we encounter the most important structural element in the entire bakery, gluten. Now, the manual states a very specific fact. Gluten strands are shortened by fat. I do not understand this at all.
It's a tricky concept.
Why is bread chewy, but a pie crust shatters in your mouth? They are both just flour and water baked in an oven. What is the fat actually doing?
This is perhaps the most fundamental chemical relationship in pastry making. Let's look at the flour. When you mix wheat flour with water, two specific proteins in the flour gluten and gliadin link together to form gluten. You can visualize gluten as microscopic, elastic rubber bands.
Okay, rubber bands.
The more you mix or knead the dough, the longer and stronger those rubber bands become. In a loaf of sourdough bread, you want strong, long rubber bands. You knead the dough for 10 minutes to build a huge network of them so they can trap the gas produced by the yeast, inflate, and give the bread that highly desirable, chewy, stretchy tear.
But I don't want a chewy pie crust. I want it to be delicate and crumbly.
Exactly. And that is where fat like cold butter, or shortening, enters the equation as a physical barrier. The manual explains that fat coats the flour proteins. When you cook cold butter into dry flour before adding any liquid, you are literally painting those protein molecules with a waterproof layer of fat.
Okay, so they're coated.
When you finally add the water, the proteins can't fully connect with each other to form those long rubber bands because the fat is physically in the way.
It physically blocks the rubber bands from forming their full length.
Yes. It literally shortens the length of the gluten strands that are able to form. That is the origin of the culinary term short crust pastry or shortbread. The fat interrupts the protein network, ensuring that the final baked good is tender and crumbly, shattering when you bite it, rather than being tough and chewy.
It is brilliant. The entire difference between a chewy New York bagel and a delicate French fruit tart is just a microscopic, waterproof coating of fat on a protein strand. And fat plays another starring role in the bakery, not just in the internal structure, but in the external finishing. The manual brings up simple buttercream.
The absolute workhorse of cake decoration.
The name gives away the math. Butter plus creamed sugar equals buttercream. It is made by creaming solid fat and confectioner's sugar together. It relies entirely on the mechanical friction of the stand mixer's paddle to force the ultrafine sugar particles to dissolve directly into the fat matrix of the butter, whipping air into it to create a stable, spreadable frosting without any cooking required at all.
And if we look at another iconic dessert that relies heavily on manipulating fat and proteins, the manual points specifically to the New York cheesecake.
Yes. The text highlights that cream cheese is the foundation of baking a cheesecake, and that it is what gives it that dense, rich, smooth texture that is iconic to the New York style. Which makes sense when you think about it. You aren't building a sponge structure with flour and trapped air like a normal birthday cake. You are essentially baking a massive, sweetened dairy custard.
The cream cheese provides a high-fat, low-moisture base. When baked gently, usually in a water bath to modulate the heat, the proteins in the cream cheese and eggs coagulate slowly and evenly, creating that signature dense, creamy mouthfeel that is structurally completely different from a flour-based cake.
So we have manipulated ingredients at the microscopic level with fat and proteins, but the final section of the baking manual deals with macro manipulation, taking the finished, fully baked product and physically forcing it to behave against its will. It explains the mechanics of making a Swiss roll.
This is a terrifying procedure for a lot of pastry students.
Yeah.
It goes against every instinct you have.
I can imagine. You bake a thin sheet of sponge cake, and the ultimate goal is to roll it up into a tight spiral with jelly or cream filling inside. But if you take a cold baked cake and try to bend it in half, it just cracks, snaps, and crumbles.
It'll just break apart.
The manual explains that to achieve the spiral, you must roll the cake tight while it is still intensely hot. And to do this without destroying the cake or burning your hands, it lists specific materials to use: parchment paper, wax paper, brown paper, or baking paper.
Timing and temperature are absolutely everything here. When that thin sponge cake comes right out of the oven, its internal structure is still highly malleable. The starches haven't fully set and crystallized, and the residual steam trapped inside makes it highly flexible. You have a very brief, maybe 2-minute window of thermal opportunity.
So you lay down a sheet of parchment paper, flip the steaming hot cake onto it, and immediately roll the paper and the cake up together into a tight spiral. The text explains that the paper prevents the sticky, hot surface of the cake from gluing itself to itself as it rolls.
Right, it acts as a barrier.
It acts as a physical barrier that forces the hot sponge to mold and cool into its new curved shape. By the time the cake cools down to room temperature, you unroll the paper and the cake retains a permanent physical memory of the spiral. It lies slightly curved, ready to be filled and rolled back up perfectly without a single crack.
It is literal temperature manipulation. You are exploiting the physical structure of the cake, bending it to your will while it is most vulnerable to heat.
Which brings us to our final topic, and it is a domestic tragedy that plays out in kitchens everywhere, which I mentioned at the very beginning of the show: stale bread.
Oh, the worst.
You go to the bakery, you buy a beautiful, expensive, crusty loaf of sourdough, you eat half of it with dinner, you want to save the rest for a few days. The natural instinct, because we have been trained to do this with all our food, is to put it in the refrigerator to keep it fresh. We put milk in the fridge, we put meat in the fridge. Does the cold preserve the bread?
The manual is emphatic on this point. Absolutely not. It is the worst thing you can do.
The text says the refrigerator actually makes bread go stale faster. How is that physically possible? We just spent the first 20 minutes of this deep dive talking about how cold environments prevent food degradation and bacterial growth.
Cold prevents biological degradation, the bacteria. But bread going stale is not a biological process. It is a purely chemical and physical process. The manual points to a phenomenon called starch retrogradation, or starch crystallization.
Let's unpack that. What is happening to the starch inside the bread?
When bread is baked, the intense heat of the oven causes the rigid starch molecules in the wheat flour to absorb the water in the dough. They swell up and turn into a soft, flexible, gelatinous state. That swollen gel is exactly what makes fresh bread soft, squishy, and delicious.
Okay, so that's the good part.
But the moment the bread comes out of the oven and begins to cool, those starch molecules desperately want to return to their original, rigid, crystallized state. They slowly start kicking the water out of their structure and realigning themselves into hard, tight crystals.
So the bread isn't necessarily drying out and losing moisture to the air.
未来を見ている